Last night, finally, more than a half a year after the unarmed Ashley Babbitt was shot by a Capitol police officer in the Capitol building, the name of the shooter was made public. And not because it was officially released by anybody in a position of authority, as has happened in every other controversial police shooting in recent memory. They would have been fine just letting his name never make it officially into the public, even though it had been circulating online for some time now. In this case, it was because the officer himself, Michael Byrd is his name, decided to speak out. Fortunately for Lieutenant Michael Byrd, who shot Ashley Babbitt in the chest at near point-blank range as she was climbing through a broken door, he was able to face the public with the help of a very powerful PR team, otherwise known as the entire mainstream media. Doesn't even have to pay them. It's a pretty sweet deal. Lester Holt of NBC News sat down with Byrd to pitch him softballs and give him a chance to extol his own virtue and courage, which he was more than willing and eager to do. Early on in the exchange, in fact, Byrd declared that he showed, quote, the utmost courage in reference to himself by shooting an unarmed woman in the chest. Listen to this.
Could you give us the nature of some of those threats?
They talked about, killing me, cutting off my head, very vicious and cruel things.
Racist things?
There were some racist attacks as well. It's all disheartening because I know I was doing my job.
Given the nature of the threats that you described, do you have any concern about showing your face and identifying yourself?
Of course I do. That is a very vital point, and it's something that is frightening. I believe I showed the utmost courage on January 6th, and it's time for me to do that now.
Oh, I'm sorry. He actually credits himself with courage twice. So he has the utmost courage on January 6th by shooting an unarmed woman in the chest. He also has the utmost courage just by sitting down in front of a friendly media who is ready to celebrate him and accept everything that he says. There's a lot of courage there as well. Now, what led into that is he was being asked about the threats, the response he's gotten after his name leaked on social media, and he claimed that he's getting all these threats, people threatening to cut off his head, he claims anyway. And you see how Lester Holt there, again, part of the PR team leading him, coaching him along, saying, racist threats? Was there racist threats too? Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, racism also. We haven't seen any of that. We have no evidence of it, but that's what he tells us. At least nobody can accuse him of having an overabundance of humility, at least. And Byrd then goes on to explain what led up to him deciding to pull the trigger on that day. He claims that he issued repeated warnings. And that's one really important part of this. Did he say anything? Did he issue any warnings before firing his weapon? He says that he did, but that's not substantiated by any video that we've ever been allowed to see or any witnesses that we've heard from. It seems like you probably could substantiate that. I'm sure on the other side of that door, there's some security footage, security cameras, all in that building. You might be able to hear some of that, but they haven't released that to us. We haven't heard from any witness who says that they heard him yelling and giving a warning, but he says that he did. And we'll listen to that part here.
He says officers barricaded the door, what he considered the last line of defense.
I had been yelling and screaming as loud as I was, please stop, get back, stop. We had our weapons drawn. There's a gun! There's a gun!
Byrd, only his hand and gun visible, targeted a figure trying to climb through a window. He fired a single, fatal shot, hitting Ashley Babbitt. She was 35 years old, an Air Force veteran, Trump supporter, and QAnon follower.
I was taking a tactical stance. You're ultimately hoping that your commands will be complied with, and unfortunately they were not.
When you fired, what could you see? Where were you aiming?
You're taught to aim for center mass. The subject was sideways, and I could not see her full motion of her hands or anything. So I guess her movement, caused the discharge to fall where it did.
And what did you think this individual was doing at that moment?
She was posing a threat to United States House of Representatives.
Now, you note there how they also included the bit about how she was a QAnon follower. I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. Now, we're told that George Floyd being a violent felon who rushed into a woman's home and put a gun to her stomach and robbed her in front of her kids, that history, those biographical details about George Floyd are not relevant at all. In fact, if you bring them up, you're a horrible person. You're a racist even somehow for simply bringing that up. It's got nothing to do with anything, we're told. And yet the fact that Ashley Babbitt believed in some kooky QAnon thing, what does that have to do with anything? Did he know that? Isn't that what we're always told about George Floyd? Well, yeah, he might have done all these horrible things and been this violent, terrible scumbag of a person, but the officer didn't know that. Didn't know that. That doesn't get him off the hook. Well, what information about Ashley Babbitt did Michael Byrd have? None. Now, this leads us to perhaps the most revealing point in the interview. Holt asks him if the fact that he didn't know whether she was armed altered his decision-making at all. And listen to his answer, because it's very important here.
Her family points out that she was not armed.
That's correct.
The fact that you weren't aware whether she was armed or not, did that alter the decision-making?
It did not.
What should we make of the fact that there were other officers in other potentially life-threatening situations who didn't use their service weapons that day?
I'm sure it was a terrifying situation. I can only control my reaction, my training, my level of expertise. That would be upon them to speak for themselves.
Former President Trump has talked about you and this incident. He says she was murdered. What does it feel like to hear that from a former president?
Well, it's disheartening. If he was in the room or anywhere and I'm responsible for him, I was prepared to do the same thing for him and his family.
What does it feel like? What does it feel like to be called a murderer? Yeah, what does it feel like? Well, it must not feel great. Can we get that question to all of the other cops in every single shooting that the BLM's been upset about? They've all been called murderers. From the very top. What about the cop who shot Ma'Khia Bryant? Saving someone's life in the process. Saving the life of a young black woman by shooting someone who's trying to stab her to death. Some crazed lunatic with a butcher knife. He was called a murderer by many, many very prominent people, including in the White House, if I remember correctly. Can we sit down with him and say, well, how does that make you feel? When you were directly saving someone's life and you were accused of racist murder. No, that question isn't asked. We only ask it of this guy here. Now, on the topic of whether or not she was armed, notice what Officer Byrd does not say. He does not say that he thought she was armed. He doesn't say that he couldn't see her hands and thought maybe there was a gun. He doesn't say that he thought she had a bomb in her backpack or something. He says that he wasn't sure if she was armed or not, and he shot anyway. That's what he just said. Now, I want you to imagine any other police officer from any other shooting in memory offering a justification like that. Well, did you think he was armed? I didn't really know. But you shot him? Yeah. What kind of reception do you think that would receive? And we'll return to that point in a moment, but let's wrap up with one more clip. Holt briefly puts Byrd in a mildly uncomfortable position by asking him about an incident a few years ago where Byrd left his loaded service weapon in a bathroom and walked away, clearly demonstrating, you would think, a certain recklessness that may have played a role in what transpired on January 6th. But Byrd simply shrugs that off and says that it was a mistake and it was dealt with, and Holt doesn't push him on it. Then at the end, Byrd, who has already bragged of his incredible steadfast courage, makes this claim. Let's listen.
Multiple investigations have now upheld Byrd's actions on January 6th.
Capitol Police in their press release after exonerating you said your actions potentially saved members and staff from serious injury and possible death. What was it like to hear those words, to see those words?
Those words meant a lot because that's exactly what I did on that day. That was my mission. That was what I prepared for. And it's rewarding and refreshing to hear that.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're rewarded and refreshed. This is grotesque, just disgusting. You think you can't be any more disgusted by the media, but then they manage to stoop to new lows every single day. I mean, he killed a woman, and the whole interview is about how does that make you feel? How does it must make you feel good to hear that? And the Capitol Police did an investigation of themselves and discovered that they themselves hadn't done anything wrong. Well, that settles that, I suppose. In fact, Michael Byrd is quoted by NBC News and these aren't the words you hear in that clip, but they quote him in their article, him saying that he saved, quote, countless lives. Countless lives. He's not even saying that he thought he was saving lives at the time. That would be one thing. He's saying that even now, looking back on it in hindsight, he did save all of those lives. I mean, how? We know that Ashley Babbitt, we know now, some of this he might not have known at the time, but now we know that Ashley Babbitt was a 5'2" unarmed female. And even now he's saying by killing her, he saved countless lives. What was she going to do? Was she going to bust through the window and murder dozens of armed cops with her bare hands? Was she Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, some kind of trained assassin? The claim from Byrd is absurd on its face. The whole interview was absurd, again, grotesque, and impossible to imagine any other police officer ever receiving that kind of treatment or being given this sort of opportunity by NBC or any other media outlet at all. And that's one important point to be made about this, of course. Before we talk about whether Babbitt's shooting was justified based on the objective facts of the case, it is inarguable that the people defending it, every single one of them, would be exploding with outrage if she had a different skin color and a different political affiliation. All of these defund the police champions have finally discovered one unarmed shooting of a civilian that they support, which only proves what we already knew. That all of their concern over police brutality really has nothing to do with police brutality at all. And I am not aware, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that none of these people have come to the defense of Ashley Babbitt. Not a single one. And they believe by their own professions that police officers are, many of them, serial killers, basically. They only get into this line of work because they want to bully and kill people and be oppressors. That's what they say. And normally, when there's a shooting of a civilian and the person is unarmed, right? That's all the information they need. They were unarmed and period, you don't kill them. We have been told this so many times. And yet in this case, it's not even that they look the other way, they celebrate it. They don't care about police brutality. They don't care about abuses by the state. They don't care about anything or anyone. They don't even care about the dead criminals whose faces they paint in murals on walls. It's only about the ideology. The dead bodies are vehicles for their ideological agenda. Now, they'll deny this, of course, and say that somehow this is different. Ashley Babbitt was in a government building, they'll say. She was trespassing. She was warned, allegedly. But almost all of the BLM martyrs were also warned repeatedly to stop, and they didn't. George Floyd was warned. Jacob Blake was warned. Rayshard Brooks was warned. They were all warned. Michael Brown was certainly warned. And as far as government buildings, if that somehow makes all the difference, and I don't see why it should. I mean, is there something sacred about a government building? If they had been doing this in some sort of private building, that changes things? Why? Are the lives of congressmen and politicians, are they actually more important than the lives of just regular people? Is that what you're saying? Apparently that's what we're being told. But if that does make all the difference, well, BLM militants invaded a police station and burned it to the ground, with cops fleeing for their lives. They assaulted a federal courthouse for months on end. If any cop had fired a single shot at any of them, and they didn't, not one shot fired, through all of those months. But if they had, there would have been eruptions of outrage. BLM would have burned cities to the ground in response. Even more cities, anyway. So we know that is the case with these people. We know that that's the hypocrisy here. And it actually is hypocrisy in this case. That's an appropriate use of the term. Because a hypocrite is someone who pretends to believe something, pretends to hold a conviction or principle that they don't actually hold. And that describes BLM and defund the police to a T. But just looking at the objective facts on the ground, the objective facts of the case, can we say, with everything that we know now, there's still a lot that we're not being told. There's still a lot of evidence that we're not being allowed to see, a lot of footage that we're not being given, many supposed eyewitnesses that we've never heard from. But based on everything that we know and have seen, can we say that Ashley Babbitt's shooting was justified? And I would say even more now that I don't see how that could possibly be the case. And I think there are a few things that point to that, and many of them were touched on in the interview, but they didn't dwell on it, they just moved on. One of them is that there were a whole lot of cops there that day, and not a single other cop felt the need to fire their weapon. I think that really tells you something. He was the only one, and he claims that he saved countless lives. If he needed to fire a shot to save countless lives, then countless lives should have been taken elsewhere, because all these other cops weren't firing any shots. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. We also know that Ashley Babbitt was surrounded by armed police officers. Behind her, coming up the steps with rifles, and on the other side of that door. He wasn't the only one in that hallway. You can even see that on the clip. Did he have to resort to lethal force in order to stop her, when she is an unarmed woman surrounded by police officers with their guns trained on her? I don't see how that could possibly be the case. Could he not have run up as she was climbing through the door and pulled her down and put her in cuffs and detained her? Could he not have easily done that? If he had said something like, well, I thought she had a gun. I thought I saw one. Yeah, then it would just be a matter of, do we believe the claim that he actually thought he saw a gun? And there'd be no way for us to know. We don't really know. We can't be inside his head in the moment. But he's not even saying that. He's not even saying, I thought she had a gun. He is saying, I didn't know. And that to me is the final fact that really settles it. She was murdered, and it's more clear than it ever was before. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.